If you haven't taken a coding class yet, you might find this exercise a little confusing because you don't have the background. Even though you read it in your book, it's still a different matter to actually apply it. This is actually a program that Mr. Bernard wrote for us. He wrote it right about Halloween time, so we're able to use it all year round, but it's a Halloween theme. It's kind of cute. We're using a specific IDE, Integrated Development Environment here. That's one that they use for their class. And an integrated development environment is much like the candy coating on M&Ms so they melt in your mouth and not in your hand. They make things easier to identify and find in your code. You notice that there are several colors of code here, and one of our first exercises is to identify which color is used for comments. Well, in this particular IDE, it might be different in another one, they use the red font, and that indicates comments that are for the human user. The computer will ignore them. Notice that the comments in this IDE or in Python are indicated with that pound sign or hashtag. Nowadays they say hashtag instead of using some other indicator. Other languages use other indicators. The next is a computer reserved word. These are words that the computer has chosen to use for itself. And print is an example of one, and the color is purple here. Now, I used print in a comment, but remember the computer ignores comments. Whereas this print is part of an actual line of code, and that is a reserved word. The next words are repetition or iteration. Remember, those are words that indicate to the computer to do something more than once. And if you see here, we have a while loop, and that's indicated in orange. And then we actually have an if then or if else embedded within that while loop, and that's also orange. So those kinds of commands are indicated in orange in this IDE. To display text to the screen, we're putting it inside a print statement, inside round parentheses, inside quotation marks, and the computer makes it green for us. There are always going to be formatting requirements anytime you want to tell the computer to do something. And finally, then we have variables. You recall that a variable is a name that you have assigned for input you will receive from the user. And we don't know the value yet, but we will eventually. And in this case, we've used a string type variable called username. So string username as a variable to hold the result that comes back from when we type to the screen, enter your name. So we didn't have to use a print command here because we're actually getting input back from the user. They'll type my name is Johnny. Well, they'll type Johnny. And so the input, this being a reserved word too, whatever value you get back from the user, put that in the variable called string username. Phew! And which symbol starts a comment? We already said that that's the hashtag or pound sign. Which syntax shows directly what to display to the screen? And we said it's going to be in parentheses, in quotation marks. Those are all syntax requirements. And then I had said to write sequence, selection, or iteration beside each of the lines. So remember, sequence is just do a line and keep going. Selection is choose this or that. And iteration is keep going until. So these print lines, for example, are just sequence lines. Do this, do this, do this. And by the way, while I'm here, you notice that this command, print parentheses, tells the computer to put a blank line on the screen for the user distinguished from putting a blank line here inside the code just to help us read it better. The computer ignores it, but it sure does help us. So there's a difference between those two kinds of blanks. And then down here on these, well, here's a selection. If in answer, if the value that's in the variable in answer is not equal to 3, then say, wrong answer, try again. Otherwise, or else, print, way to go. And look at the if and else, these selection statements require the syntax of a colon at the end of the line. Different languages are different. And by the way, let's look at this line as long as we're here and see what this one looks pretty complicated. Let's see. Type to the, start from the end and go back to the beginning. Type to the screen, enter your selection. I have to go find the line again, sorry. So there we go. Enter your selection, type that to the screen, put a colon, put a space, and then whatever they type back to you, get that as input, and whatever it was, make it into an integer. That means a number without a decimal. So assuming that they typed in a 3, well, is that a letter 3 or a number 3? So this variable says interpret it as an integer, a number, and put the answer in this variable called int answer. So you start from the end and read to the beginning. And this is a selection statement. So they can either say, no, you got it wrong, do it again, or say, way to go, and then get the person's name and put it in the answer. So sequence selection and then iteration, we have 2 iteration statements here on this while loop. It means do this as long as in answer is not 3. Anytime when you get in answer, then you're done. Notice that the while is at the left margin and all of the other lines are indented. So we frequently used indentations as a way to indicate structure within a program. You could have added a comment at the beginning and a comment at the end to show the beginning and end of the loop. It wasn't required, but it would have been an idea. Let me see. What punctuation is used for the if statement? I already said that's a quotation colon. How do you know the beginning and end of the iterative sequence? That's because you had the indentation start and end. Here's the second one. It's the same way. Which command gets input from the user? That's the input command. Which command displays output to the screen? That's the print command. One more concept we should mention before we go is about functions. Now I'm going to talk about functions from 2 different standpoints. One is included here and one is not. So let's go back and look at this print line. You see how it says print and then parentheses? Whereas this line says print and then it has something in the parentheses. These are functions which are pre-made code that somebody wrote and you can use. And it has a name, and the syntax always required, that's a dead giveaway, is that it has parentheses. Sometimes with something in it, sometimes not, sometimes nothing is in it, but a function is a little block of code that someone wrote. Now, here are blocks of code that somebody else wrote, but I could do the same thing for myself. I could write, let's say this while loop into a block of code that I can name, and it might be called a function, it might be called a procedure, different names for it. But anyway, I write this block of code and give it a name, and then I can keep reusing it easily. Functions are common not only in actual coding, but also if you're using Microsoft Office programs especially in Excel and things like that, there are functions all over in computers, and it's important for you to understand just that basic concept of it has a name and then it has parentheses, which may or may not have something in it. And then somewhere, somebody wrote the code, which you may see or may not see, but you can use it anytime you want. And then the final thing here on the back is to write what might show on the screen. The purpose of this exercise was to give you an introduction to the way coding looks, so that when you see any kinds of code, you can look for these same features. They exist in every language, and you can just learn to gauge, learn how to analyze and find the syntax and the requirements for each individual language, but they all work alike.